Hi guys, so even though I'm out, I wanted to make sure that you weren't going to be behind on your minimum wage paper. So I wanted to record a little walkthrough, kind of just how we do in class, so that you can get started on your minimum wage paper and we can pick up where we left off when I come back. Especially since the beginning of this paper is just kind of just the facts. It's not a whole lot of discussion. It's not you really picking a side. The beginning is just the facts about minimum wage. So you're going to go ahead, go into Classroom, and grab my Classroom, my Google Classroom. Grab your copy of this outline, okay, just like we've done before. You're going to fill out your sections, and I will just give you the reminder I give you every single time. It'll save you a boatload of work if you do the following. One, you're going to make sure that all of your writing is in complete sentences. That way, when we're done, you can just copy and paste what you have here and put it in your document. You're also going to want to make sure everything is in your own words while you do this. Otherwise, again, you'll be doing a ton of work at the end. I'm going to remind you when we finish with each source that we're going to cite that source, but if you don't do that on your own, if you just kind of ignore me talking to you, and since I'm not watching you doing this, and you don't cite that source on your own, you don't go into my bib, then at the end, again, you're going to have a boatload of hurt because you're going to have a ton of work to do. Okay? So first things first, I want you to open up your outline and then head on over to my bib, and I'm going to do the same because I haven't set up my my works cited page yet. And again, this is a video. It's for you. You can pause at any time, do what you need to do, take your time, and then come back to the video. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new works cited. Apparently I'm going to log in first. Hold on. There we go. I'm going to start a new project here. I'm going to call it Minimum Wage 2022, just because I have a few more minimum wage ones from previous years. You can call it minimum wage, you can call it whatever. Okay. Once I've done that, I'm going to go ahead back to my paper, and we're going to chat a little bit about our introduction. So, our first question here is, what is minimum wage? And that's something that we're going to need to answer for ourselves in order to introduce this paper. So I'm going to follow this link. Okay, and this is going to bring me to the U.S. Department of Labor website. And I want to find out what is the minimum wage. Okay, so it says the federal minimum wage for covered non-exempt employees is $7.25 per hour. So it talks a little bit about the federal minimum wage, but that doesn't explain exactly what I need here. And it says the federal minimum wage, many states also have minimum wage laws. In cases where an employee is subject to both state and federal minimum wage laws, the employee is entitled to the higher of the two minimum wages. Oops. The federal minimum wage provisions are contained in the Fair Labor Standards Act, and the Fair Labor Standards Act does not provide wage payment or collection procedures for an employee's usual or promised wages or commissions in excess of those required by the FLSA. However, some states do have laws under which such claims, sometimes including fringe benefits, may be filed. That's a whole lot of words that we don't need a ton of here. And it says the Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division administers and enforces the federal minimum wage law. So again, we're just trying to answer the question here, what is the minimum wage? And in essence here, what we're looking at is that the minimum wage is the lowest amount of money that somebody is allowed to pay their employee. Okay, this is going to end up being our source here. I just kept it here so that I didn't forget. All right, so this is the lowest amount of money that an employer is allowed to pay their employee. It is the minimum. It is the bare bottom of what they're allowed to pay. This does not say that they cannot pay more than this, right? It's just the minimum, okay? They have to start at this amount. And as we'll see when we go further, there's some exceptions to minimum wage. But for the most part, you can't have an employer say, hey, I know the minimum wage is $7.25, but I'm going to pay you $5 an hour because I think that's what you're worth. It's not how it works. Okay? And then this is something that gets a little bit tricky for people. And we're using the same source here, so we're just going to keep trucking along. It says, is minimum wage determined by the federal government or the states? Under which law? Can a state make a lower minimum wage than the federal guidelines? This is when we kind of go back to this page. And it says this is the federal minimum wage, $7.25 an hour. And many states also have minimum wage laws. If the employee is subject to both the state and the federal minimum wage laws, the employee is entitled to the higher of the two minimum wage laws. And again, this can get a little bit tricky to kind of understand. Okay? So a lot of times, not all the time, there are going to be different minimum wages for federal and state. Okay? So while the federal minimum wage is $7.25, the state minimum wage in a state, whatever state, I don't know exactly, let's say Iowa, might be $10.25. In that case, you have to be paid as a worker in Iowa the higher of those two, the $10.25. If your state does not have a minimum wage, then you would only get paid that, or the minimum you could get paid is that $7.25 that the federal government sets up. Okay, so in this case, like I said, the employee gets paid whichever is more, state or federal. In some states, the state minimum wage is going to be significantly higher than the federal. New York State is one of those. We'll have to look up exactly what it is in New York State as we move along, but I believe it's almost double. And then we look back to our information about, okay, what law does this fall under? This falls under the Fair Labor Standards Act, okay, FLSA. So federal minimum wage is determined and falls under the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this link, okay, Department of Labor link that we've been using, and I'm going to bring it over to MyBib, and I'm going to create a citation for this here. All right. So I'm going to look to see if there's a better date published on here. Sometimes it'll tell me when it's updated. Sometimes not. No, doesn't look like it. Okay. We have that. That's fine. Okay, so use Department of Labor. It's a building here. Okay. I'm actually going to go ahead and I'm going to delete this this U.S. Department of Labor section from the title of article or page. I'm going to press save. Okay. And again, they kind of changed how this is set up. Now you got to come down to this little clipboard right here. And go ahead and copy that. So U.S. Department of Labor, and I would bring that over. I already have it in my paper. Okay. Part C just says, what kinds of workers might earn minimum wage? Okay, who are we looking at? Number of Americans, age, occupation, industry. Not everyone's earning minimum wage, okay? A lot of people are earning far more than that, or they're in a salaried position. But I want to know who is earning minimum wage. So I'm going to scroll down to my sources. And this is bringing me to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, okay? And this is a report from 2008, or the report is from 2019, but it covers some information from 2018, which is fairly up to date when we're talking about this. It can take a while to get some of these statistics in, and the pandemic has made it even harder because things are just not normal, right? So, you know, we have especially seen, you'll hear people whining that people at Burger King are making too much. They should be making the minimum wage, and they're making twice that, and whatever. So, because we have a labor shortage, so how are you going to deal with it? All right, so what kinds of workers might earn minimum wage? So it's already telling us here that 81.9 million workers ages 16 and over in the U.S. were paid at hourly rates. That doesn't say minimum wage, just hourly rates instead of a salary, representing 58.5% of all wage and salary workers, okay? So when we're talking about hourly rates and hourly wage versus salary, I am a salaried position. I get paid a certain amount per year, right? And it doesn't matter. I get a certain amount of benefits and I get time off and whatever. And let's say if I'm out sick, if that's worked into my benefits, I still get paid for that day. I don't have anything docked from it. I'm going to get the same amount on every paycheck that comes in. Unless I do something extra, like chaperone a game or something like that. But hourly rates, you get paid hourly. My husband gets paid hourly, right? He's a part-time bank teller. If he doesn't show up for a day of work, if he calls in sick, he doesn't get paid for that day. Okay? His paycheck every 2 weeks could be one number, could be low, it could be high, depending on how many hours he worked. But he gets paid hourly. Okay? So that's what we're looking at here. And it says among those paid by the hour, 434,000 workers earned exactly the prevailing federal minimum wage of $7.25 per hour. So 434,000 workers earned exactly the federal minimum wage. About 1.3 million had wages below the federal minimum, which is questionable, right? Together, these 1.7 million workers with wages at or below the federal minimum wage make up about 2.1% of all hourly workers. Okay? Ooh. Hold on. Sorry about that. I accidentally closed out my document. But here we are. Okay. So, what kinds of workers might earn minimum wage? What are we looking at? Well, about 1.7 million workers in the United States earn at or below the federal minimum wage. 1.7 million Americans make the minimum wage, the federal minimum wage, or less than that. Okay, coming back to our report. It says that, let's see, the percentage of hourly workers, we don't need that information just yet. All right, let's look at age. So it says minimum wage workers tend to be young. Although workers under age 25 represented only about 1/5 of hourly paid workers, they make up just under half of those paid the federal minimum wage or less. Among employed teenagers aged 16 to 19 paid by the hour, about 8% earn the minimum wage or less, compared with about 1% of workers ages 25 and older. So this is where we can kind of talk about what does the age bracket look like for our minimum wage workers. Okay. So workers under 25 make up 50% of people earning at or below the federal minimum wage. And when you hear people argue about the minimum wage, a lot of times they'll say, this is what it was made for. It's made for teenagers working an after-school job, just trying to make some extra money to pay for, gas in their car, to go out with their girlfriend, to do whatever, right? This is the argument. People will say, yeah, it's for people who are young. It's for college students to make a little extra spending money. That's what it's supposed to be. Okay? And we'll come back to that argument later, but it's important to look at age. All right. Okay, so let's look at education at this point. Only because in gender and race and Hispanic or Latino ethnicity, you don't see a huge, like, shocking difference between men and women. It says about 3% of women and 2% of men who earned hourly wages earn at or below the prevailing federal minimum. Not a huge discrepancy there. Same thing with race. We have 3% of Black or African American workers earn the federal minimum wage, and then white, Asian, and Hispanic workers, about 2% of those workers. So again, not a huge difference. But then we get to education, and we definitely talked about this in our Millennials versus Baby Boomers paper, that that when you have people with a lower education, they tend to make less. So it says among hourly paid workers ages 16 and older, about 3% of those who, without a high school diploma, earn the federal minimum wage or less, compared to 2% of those who had a high school diploma with no college, about 2% with some college, and about 1% of college graduates. So only about 1% of college graduates are working a minimum wage job or earning at or less than the minimum wage. Let's see what we got here. Okay. So workers without a high school diploma are more likely to earn at or below the federal minimum wage. And this is where you can add some of that information. You can say, you know, about 3%, I'm just going to go back to here, about 3% of those without a high school diploma earn the federal minimum wage or less. Go ahead and pause if you need to. Okay. Then let's look at full and part-time status. So it says about 5% of part-time workers, people who usually work fewer than 35 hours per week, were paid the federal minimum wage or less, compared to about 1% of full-time workers. Okay, so about 5% of part-time workers compared to about 1% of full-time workers. And this makes sense. Okay. So about 5% of part-time workers are paid federal minimum wage, about 1% of full-time workers. Okay, and then it asks about like the type of occupation or industry that they may work in. So I'm going to come back over here. So let's read about this occupation and industry, these two sections here. So it says among major occupational groups, service occupations had the highest percentage of hourly paid workers earning at or below the federal minimum wage, about 6%. At about 6%. Just under 3/4 of workers earning the minimum wage or less in 2018 were employed in service occupations, mostly in food preparation and serving related jobs. This is what we're talking about. The person who works at Burger King, the person who's making your burrito at Chipotle, the lady who's scooping your broccoli cheddar soup into your bread bowl at Panera. Okay? This is going to be the highest percentage of or the service occupations have the highest percentage of hourly paid workers earning at or below the federal minimum wage. And then we go into industry, and it says the industry with the highest percentage of workers earning hourly wages at or below the minimum wage was leisure and hospitality, about 11%. And about 3/5 of all workers paid at or below the federal minimum wage were employed in this industry, almost entirely in restaurants and other food services. For many of these workers, tips may supplement the hourly wages received. Okay? So I'm going to come back here. and make sure that that information is included. So service occupations, that's the most people earning at or below the federal minimum wage. I say fed a lot in here, just a reminder. Don't do that in your essay. You need to say federal. I just got lazy, but I don't have a paper to write, so I don't know what to tell you. Leisure and hospitality had the biggest percentage earning at or below federal minimum wage, mostly food service and restaurants. This is my annual threat to you, okay? Now that you know this, you'd be a real jerk, okay? To be rude to your server, to be rude to the person who is making your food at Burger King. If they are not rude to you, please do not be rude to them. They've had a very long day and they get paid diddly squat. All right? So, pause if you need to, get that information down. Once you do that, we're going to cite this source. So I'm going to go back over. Wrong one. I'm going to get this U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, and I'm going to paste that report in here. I always just say no just because I like to get to the main page and fill everything out there. There it is. Okay. So, there's no report author, so I'm going to just say that the report author is the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. Okay. This is our title of our report. It was published in March of 2019. That's all we need. URL's there. We don't need anything else for this one. So again, you're going to copy that in-text citation. I believe, no, we just used it for this one. So in this box, I like to put it in like 3 different places because we got a lot of information from this. So after every like 2 bullet points of information, you might just want to put, or 2 sentences of information, you might want to put a citation there because I have it like here, I have it here, I have it again here. Okay, you want to put it a bunch of times. Okay, once you do that, then you're going to move on to your anecdote. And this is where you're going to do some work on your own and come up with something that, you can use as an anecdote. Now, it is also important that you are going to need to choose a position at this point. And I know, it gets tricky. There are good arguments on both sides, so it's not a big deal if you choose one versus the other, especially because this is your final paper when you are, as final paper for economics as seniors. I'm going to be letting you really do a lot of the arguing on your own. Okay, I'll guide you with it, and you'll find that it is here in our outline, but it's going to be a lot on you. You're going to have to find these stories and pick these things. I give you sources where you can get that information, but we're not going to be deciding as a class that one way or the other is the right way. So you have to decide. Are you pro raising the minimum wage, or are you against raising the minimum wage? If you need to do a little more research now, or you need to really think about it or chat with someone about it, this is the time to do it. So now what you're going to do is you're going to find a story of someone who is living on minimum wage. You're going to try to use someone whose story backs up your own point of view, and then you need to put that story in your own words. You can use quotes from them if you'd like, but the whole story cannot be a quote. You could, I'll show you an example. This is not a real story. Do not copy this. It is fake. This person does not exist. Okay, so this is just my information. So Maria, she's a housekeeper, or works in housekeeping in Georgia. She has 4 kids. She lives in a 2-bedroom apartment, earns federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour, struggles to pay her monthly bills, and is afraid that one unexpected expense will cause her to lose her apartment. Okay, this is in kind of my own words here, and this would obviously be pro raising the minimum wage because she's having a really hard time paying her bills here. So, if I was choosing Maria's story, again, Maria's not real, if I was choosing her story, I would put it in my own words, and then I could include a quote or two from her, okay? So what I could do is I could go in and I could find a quote where she says, I'm afraid that I'm going to get a hospital bill, or I'm going to be in an ambulance, whatever, whatever Maria says. I'm afraid I'm going to go in an ambulance and I'm never going to be able to pay off that bill as long as my children are alive. Put that into quotes, okay? Other than that, all in your own words. So these are the suggested sources. We have a couple that are pro raising the minimum wage. So you have the CNBC one, what it's like to live on minimum wage in the U.S. Then we have raisingminimumwage.com. We have some stories that you can choose. And we have some that are against raising the minimum wage. So what I might do here, let's say I am pro raising the minimum wage. I can go through here. I can find a story. Look, I've got a ton, okay? I'll read more about, let's say, Nicole Mason from Killeen, Texas? Okay? It says her story. It says it in their own words, and it's in their words, like from their point of view. So that might be easy for you to kind of transfer, okay? She's a single mother. I says, I am a single mother of 2 boys. Nicole Mason is a single mother. She is raising 2 boys on her own, and then go like that, okay? Describe one of these people's stories. If you're against raising the minimum wage, we have people, and these are usually business owners or like small business owners whose businesses have been highly affected by raising the minimum wage. So, hold on. Here we go. You have, these are businesses, okay? Anonymous San Francisco apparel manufacturer. Yeah, I wouldn't use that one because it doesn't actually have a place. This has a lot. Boca Nova in Oakland. Restaurant servers will no longer receive tips. A note on the menu reads, in lieu of gratuity, a 16% lift up Oakland charge and 4% service charge will be added to your tax, or to your check. The 4% goes directly to the servers, and the 16% covers the cost of raising other staff salaries. The Contra Costa Times report this policy changes presents a pay cut. Servers made between $38 and $70 an hour with tips before the change, and now they'll earn between $22 and $28 an hour. And it talks about how raising the minimum wage actually they had to cut down on their salaries because they couldn't afford to do it, right? So you choose one of those, and you would write that anecdote out in your own words. You can quote them, and then you have to cite that source. If you're having trouble citing that source, I can help you deal with that when you get back. I would just put something underneath it where you said something like, need to cite source, so you don't forget, okay? Once you do that, again, pause, do that, right? Come back to me. Now be back to me. Once you do that, you're going to go to this thesis statement section. This is the last part of our introduction. It says, clearly state whether or not the minimum wage should be raised. We're talking about the federal minimum wage. Should the federal minimum wage be raised? Currently at $7.25 an hour. And this is where you write something to the effect of and this is going to be a good lead-in from your story, where you could say, I'm talking about Maria, and I just say, stories like Maria's show that the federal minimum wage should be raised. Or, stories like this business show that the federal minimum wage should not be raised. Okay? Or, Americans like Maria show us this. Whatever. You're going to create that thesis statement, and then you are done with your introduction.